Oh, shit. I didn't turn my AC off. Ain't that a nice way to start a review? Oh, shit. I think it's turned it back on. Damn it. Come on. There we go. What an intro. Sorry, guys. Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the debut of a new series on my channel. A series that I've been wanting to start for quite a while. And yes, debuting a brand new set of shades that I really, really like how these look. Today, in the debut episode of Zombiesploitation, a series that I'm going to start reviewing every single zombie movie that I own, and even more as I add them to my collection. Last year, if viewers remember, I did a little series of zombie reviews with Jeff Welch from Bakersfield's Self-Perfection and Self-Preservation, if I remember that name correctly. Just rolls right off your tongue. He and I reviewed the original George Romero Dead trilogy, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead, and capped that little series off with a top 10 list of our favorite zombie films. And that was the last videos that I did before I went on paternity leave, I believe. So consider that to be like a prelude to this series. I've been meaning to do this series for a long time, and I've had the name of Zombiesploitation in head for pretty much since day one of like saying, hey, I want to do a like full-on zombie movie series, but I want it to have a name. First thing that came to mind, Zombiesploitation. Because I didn't want to do like Zombie-a-thon or Zombie Marathon. That sounds lame. I think Zombiesploitation sounds a lot better. So hopefully you guys like the title as well. So indeedy do. This series will be not really done in any particular order, but I have quite a few zombie films outside of the original Dead trilogy. And as I've stated many times, the zombie genre is my favorite horror subgenre. And now that it's post 4th of July, kind of gets me into a little bit more of a horror mood. But also in my opinion, the summertime is probably the best time to be into zombie movies. That and winter, oddly. So yeah, I'm in a zombie movie mood, so I want to start off this series. Again, not in any particular order, but I think it would be pretty fitting. Since last year I reviewed the original, why not this year do I debut Zombiesploitation with a review of the 1990 Tom Savini remake of Night of the Living Dead? Yes, indeed. Now, viewers who might remember my top 10 favorite zombie movies video, I had Tom Savini's Night of the Living Dead on that list as well. I believe it was number 5 or 3. I can't quite remember. I haven't seen that video in a long time. But Night of the Living Dead 90, as Tom Savini calls it, is one of my favorite zombie films of all time. It's just shy of being one of my favorite films in general. And it's also one of my favorite remakes in general of all time, too. This is a damn solid movie, in my opinion. And I've actually been really wanting to talk about this for a long time. So this should be a fun one. So, yes, indeed. Night of the Living Dead is a remake of George A. Romero's 1968 horror film of the same name. And of course, we all know Tom Savini as the king of splatter from throughout the 1970s and 80s, doing effects for films such as Friday the 13th, Parts 1 and 4, The Prowler. Actually, let me look up some of his Let me look up some of his filmography. Tom Savini is he's an actor, stunt performer, and sometimes director, but he's most well known as a prosthetic makeup artist. He worked on George Romero's Martin, the original Dawn of the Dead, the original Day of the Dead, Monkey Shines, Creepshow, Maniac, The Burning, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. So he's definitely a big horror guy. Aside from directing this movie, he's also directed 3 episodes. Hello. He directed 3 episodes of the Tales from the Dark Side series, as well as one segment in the anthology horror film The Theater Bazaar. He also did stunt work for films such as Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Night Riders, From Dusk Till Dawn, Crotch Gun, Sex Machine. That's his name. What a name. Planet Terror. That'll be another movie that'll show up on this series. Machete, which he's like in 2 seconds. Django Unchained. He's in that even less. And Machete Kills. That doesn't surprise me. Robert Rodriguez. He's close friends with. So Tom Savini is definitely a big time. He's a very well-known figure in the horror community. And if you remember back to my Alien versus Predator Requiem, you remember Trevor Boy has this spiel and belief that special effects technicians don't make for the best directors. Well, I do think that is mostly true. There are some exceptions. Jim Henson and Frank Oz both directed The Dark Crystal, and I believe the original Labyrinth as well. Of course, Stan Winston directed the original Pumpkinhead. And of course, with this movie, Tom Savini, being a big special effects technician, directed this film. Trev may think Stan Winston is the best example of a special effects guy directing a horror movie. I personally think this is the best example of a special effects guy directing a movie, because Night of the Living Dead 1990 is a pretty damn solid flick. And one that I think ages pretty damn well, as my nephew over here actually did enjoy the movie. What would you rate it?
The Night of the Living Dead?
Yeah.
I'll rate it. I didn't have that much gore in it, so probably like a 9 out of 10.
Okay, that's higher than I give it. Yes, my nephew Salo is over here. Say hello.
Hello.
Although it's funny, so nowadays Night of the Living Dead is considered to be one of the best horror movie remakes ever. But upon its release, initial response to the remake was very negative. Roger Ebert awarded, surprise, surprise, because Roger Ebert's a horse's ass, awarded the film 1 star out of 4, writing, "The remake is so close to the original that there is no reason to see both." Corinne James of the New York Times wrote, there was no real need to remake a film that lives on the campy cult appeal it has acquired over time. Variety called it a crass bit of cinematic grave robbing. That's pretty harsh. Modern criticism has been much more appreciative. Bloody Disgusting rated it 4.5 out of 5 and wrote, "This film works on so many levels. Normally remakes are horrible and diverge so much from the original film. This one is so close to the original that it's scary." I'll save that for a little later. Patrick Noggle, for the site DVD Verdict, rated it 83 out of 100 and called it one of the superior zombie movies available. As the film has gone on, it has acquired a pretty big cult following, especially amongst zombie movie fans. And I've never really seen anybody in the zombie movie community really harshly criticize this film and call it bad. This movie seems to be pretty universally positively received. Thank God, because obviously I've stated, I am definitely one of those people. But I've never really seen anybody make this statement, though this should surprise nobody. I do think this movie is the superior version of Night of the Living Dead. Upon my most recent viewing, however, my opinion of it isn't quite as high as I used to hold it, but this is still a phenomenal film and is easily one of my favorite zombie films. My personal history for this film, so around 2010 okay, so as I've stated, last year for my George Romero Dead movies, I used to be deathly afraid of zombies. Even up until I was about 16 or 17 years old, I was hellaciously afraid of zombies. They scared me, they petrified me. They were the only monster in fictional media, more than vampires, werewolves, ghosts, monsters. Zombies scared me the absolute most. And honestly, as a 25-year-old guy, there's still things about zombies that do still kind of spook me. But with that fear also came an intense morbid curiosity. Like even though zombie films scared me, I still loved watching them. And it was around this time where I would watch the 2005 Doom movie, the first 3 live action Resident Evil movies, and the first animated Resident Evil movie. And of course, George Romero's Day of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead as well. But I quickly did learn that Night of the Living Dead had a more modern remake. And if you remember in my Candyman review, I mentioned that I went to a theater in downtown Portland that would re-release movies around Halloween. And me and my stepdad caught the last 20 minutes of this movie in theaters waiting to see the original Candyman. And I do think that was the theme because Tony Todd is in both films. So I was like, oh, wow, this actually looks pretty cool. So back in the days when you could upload a full movie to YouTube in parts and watch it for free there, I watched this movie mostly. I never finished it because I like the first 2 acts so good. But I watched the first 2 acts of this movie on YouTube, and it always really, really fascinated me. I was like, wow, this movie actually looks pretty awesome. So then it was around 2013 or so, I finally decided to buy this movie. I just bought the standard DVD. And I sat down and I watched it in full with my stepdad. We both dug it, and I was very, very impressed. I immediately was thinking, I like this more. I had seen the original Night of the Living Dead at this point, and while my stepdad is way more of a fan of the original, I prefer this one, but he did like this movie. And I was, again, very, very, very impressed with this film. And ever since, over the years, this movie's always been a favorite. Even though, funny that as much as I love this movie, this is actually the first time that I watched it in 5-6 years. Yeah, about that. But still, this movie holds up pretty damn well. So with all that being said, before we begin, a word from our sponsor. One sec. Okay. With all that being said, let's get into the plot of Tom Savini's Night of the Living Dead. Siblings Barbara, played by Patricia Tallman, and Johnny, played by Bill Moseley, visit their mother's grave in a remote Pennsylvania cemetery. During their visit, they are attacked by a zombie. Johnny is killed while Barbara flees the cemetery and discovers what appears to be an abandoned farmhouse. She seeks shelter there, only to find another pack of zombies. Shortly after, a man named Ben, played by Tony Todd in his debut lead role, a man named Ben arrives, and the two clear the house of the dead and begin the process of barricading the doors and windows. They discover other survivors hiding in the cellar of the house. Harry Cooper, played by Tom Tools from either Harry or Henry, I think Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, a selfish and argumentative husband, his wife Helen, their daughter Sarah, who was bitten by a zombie and has fallen seriously ill, and teenage lovers Tom Bittner, played by William Butler, and Judy Rose Larson. The group is divided over what their next course of action should be. Harry believes everyone should retreat to the cellar and barricade the door to wait for the authorities. Ben thinks that the cellar is a death trap and that they would be better served fortifying the house, which at least has alternate escape routes. And Barbara suggests that the group should simply leave the house on foot after she notices the zombies' limited mobility, them being very slow. An argument between Ben and Harry leaves the Coopers in the basement to tend to their ailing daughter, while the other survivors go upstairs to continue reinforcing the doors and windows. The loud construction attracts a large mob of zombies to the farmhouse. The group devises a plan to escape using Ben's truck, which is out of gas, by refueling at a locked gas pump a few hundred yards away. They find a set of keys within the corpse who lived in the farmhouse. Judy Rose, Tom, and Ben proceed up the hill toward the gas pump, but their plan unravels when Ben falls from the truck and is left to defend himself. And to their horror, the key to the gas pump is not among the set that they have brought with them. And when Tom tries to shoot the lock off, the gasoline gushing forth is ignited by a burning piece of wood, and the resulting explosion kills both Tom and Judy. Similar to the events of the original, though this is when the movie does start to deviate pretty drastically from the original. Well, not drastically, but enough to make a significant difference. Because thus far, as you can probably tell, this movie has been pretty damn similar to the original. Ben returns to the house to find things beginning to dissolve into chaos. Harry has wrestled Barbara's gun away from her and is now armed. Unknown to the survivors, the Cooper's daughter Sarah has succumbed to the bite on her arm and is transformed into a zombie. She attacks and bites her distraught mother. When Sarah makes her way upstairs, she triggers a shootout between her father, who is trying to protect her, and Ben and Barbara, who are trying to protect themselves. Both Ben and Harry are badly wounded, and Barbara shoots Sarah in the head. Harry retreats upstairs to the attic, while Ben makes his way to the cellar, where he shoots a reanimated Helen. Ben gradually goes into shock, and after realizing the gas key has been in the cellar the entire time, he laughs mindlessly at the irony before succumbing to his injuries and dies. Meanwhile, Barbara leaves the house alone and attempts to find help. She eventually joins a group of countryside locals who are clearing the area of the undead and awakens the next day, surrounded by the safety of the media and townspeople, as me and my nephew jokingly call them. Oop, there's Trump supporters in the 90s. Led by Sheriff McClelland, played by Chilly Billy Cardille from the original. Noticing hillbillies playing around with a few zombies, she comments on the similarities between the living and the undead. She returns to the farmhouse to find Ben, who has now been reanimated as a zombie. He gazes at Barbara in a possible moment of recognition before being shot by the hillbillies. When Harry emerges from the attic alive, Barbara kills him in a fit of rage and retribution for causing Ben's death and turns to leave the house, telling the hillbillies they have another one for the fire. Barbara watches as the bodies are burned on a pyre, similar, sort of, to the original. Oh, and actually, I was wrong. Sheriff McClelland is not played by Chili Billy Cardille. He is played by Russell Striner, the original co-producer from the original film, and the guy who played Johnny in the original movie as well. So, sorry. So what do I think of this plot? It's actually my first pro. The differences and similarities. So I'm just going to jump right into my pros now. Obviously, this movie's plot is very similar to the original film. But I don't think it's a bad thing. For fans of the original movie, it can be like even though the original film has been colorized, it can be a nice surprise to watch a modern updated in color version of the original film because this movie is so similar. But it's also different enough, from my opinion, to still be its own thing. There's certain scenes that are shuffled around slightly. There's different elements that are changed, some minorly and some drastically. But there's still lots of nods and homages to the original film. That partly has to do with another pro that I'm going to talk about, which is pro number 2, is the passion. A lot of the cast and crew mostly crew members from the original Night of the Living Dead came back to work on this film. The biggest one, Russell Striner, who played Johnny in the original, has a cameo here as Sheriff McClelland. But the biggest one of all, this is the most prominent. Well, also, the reason why Tom Savini came back to direct this movie, whom he was pushed to do so by George Romero. Tom Savini was supposed to work on the original Night of the Living Dead, but he was called to serve in Vietnam as a combat photographer, so he didn't get to work on the original. So he saw this opportunity to rectify that twist of fate. But of course, the biggest one of all is that George Romero himself actually returned to use the original screenplay that he had for the original film, and he wrote it for this film. There's also some scenes that are trimmed. There's some fat that's cut from the original movie. And a lot of people can also see this as being a bit of a streamlined version of the original movie. More on that later. But you can just feel the passion. Like, this movie was worked on not just by fans of the original movie, but this movie literally was worked on by people that worked on the original movie. It's written by the original movie's director, and it's directed by a guy who would have done the effects, but still had a very close tie to the rest of the series then on, at least up to Land of the Dead. You can just feel the passion. This movie's made by people that do love and respect the original film, but they still want to imbue it with some originality and make this movie its own thing so it can stand on its own. And I think they succeed wonderfully. But going back to the differences and similarities, there is still a lot. There's many, many similarities between this and the original, which I can see why that some people can see this as a problem. But thankfully, it's not like the 1990 remake of Psycho. Funny that, or 1998 remake of Psycho, where it's literally 95% the same film. I'd say it's more like 40-60. It still is very similar, but there's enough differences to make it its own thing. Like, obviously, it's in color. It's 22 years later. It's updated to be the 90s instead of the late 1960s. The acting is way better. The effects are way better. The general plan is to board up a house and get to the gas pump so that they can escape. There's a strong black man as the film's lead. There's a conflict between the main human protagonist and the main human antagonist on should we stay upstairs or should we stay downstairs. We don't know, and we're going to fight each other to figure that out. There are a lot of similarities. I appreciate it because, well, this is George Romero's original vision for the original movie. So it doesn't feel like someone just taking something that wasn't theirs and calling this new thing theirs. This feels like an updated, improved version of the original film, but the differences are still much appreciated. Like I said, it is in color, and the effects are a lot better. Going to eat?
Yeah.
Okay. Geez, you can touch the ceiling better than I can. Anyway, yeah, the effects are way better, but the biggest change of all will be pro number 3. Barbara, played by Patricia Tallman, whom I'm now pretty sure that's a reference in Doom 2005, which that will be getting a re-review. Ooh, but I think we might be watching Doom 2005 tomorrow. It's a good movie. Obvious foreshadowing. Yeah, Barbara in this movie is phenomenal. She might be my favorite thing about this movie. She's got the competition in just a little bit I'll talk about. But she does an absolutely phenomenal job. This is the only movie, at least that I know of, that she was in. Let's see. Patricia Tallman is an American actress, stunt performer, and studio executive, best known for her starring roles in Night of the Living Dead, Babylon 5, and Star Trek. Oh, she was on Star Trek The Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. She worked on 50 episodes across the Star Trek franchise. Damn. She was also in Night Riders, Monkey Shines, and Creepshow 2, though she only did stunts for that film. She also played the possessed witch under heavy makeup in Army of Darkness. Huh. And she was Laura Dern's stunt double in Jurassic Park. That's cool. So she's got she's kind of like a cult actress. She's been around for a while, but her work is not super notable, but she is, I would still say she's pretty prominent. But of all, well, this is the only thing that I've seen, but she is phenomenal in this movie. She does start out being very, very similar to the original Barbara. And at first I was kind of thinking, please tell me they're not going to repeat Barbara from the original. At first, she is very similar. She screams a lot. She whimpers a lot. She trips and stumbles a lot. But very quickly, she grows into a much stronger female character. I don't know if this was intentional, but this being only 4 years after Aliens, I do think they were emulating how Sigourney Weaver portrayed Ripley in Aliens with Barbara in this movie. She ditches her frumpy clothes and just puts on a pair of combat boots, slacks, and a t-shirt. She totes guns. She picks up melee weapons and she snipes zombies from afar. She takes no shit from the dudes and puts her foot down and saying, "Hey, I'm not putting up with any of this bullshit. I have plans. I think we can get away if we fight. You told me to fight, so I'm fighting. I'm trying to really keep myself together here. And she is so awesome in this movie. She's not mean. There's one scene where she does snap at Ben and Harry. I think it's at a justifiable moment. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But she does snap at one point. But she's very cooperative. She works well with Ben, especially. She's not bitchy. She's not hostile. She's very helpful. She's very cooperative. And she's, of course, very badass. She takes no shit from the dudes, and she has no hesitation in gunning down zombies left and right. Barbara is fucking awesome in this movie. Cannot say enough good things about her. Yeah, she's great. Speaking of which, pro number 4, I think. Yeah, 4 is Ben, played by Tony Todd. Fucking A. He's awesome. He is now, not to say that Dwayne Jones in the original Night of the Living Dead is bad, but Tony Todd just takes whatever Dwayne did in the original film and makes it 10 times better. He is very similar to the original version of Ben, but I still think that he is even better. My name's not Jason, first of all. Yes and no. To answer Titanic Discussion's question, do you think the original Barbara is a realistic character? Yes and no. But realism is boring, so I don't care. No, Ben, played by Tony Todd. He is very similar, but I still prefer this version of Ben over the original. He's a little mouthy. He's a little sassy, but I just think overall he's much more badass and more hands-on and much more of a quick thinker type of person. He is not afraid to get really physical with zombies. Like he's kicking them and throwing them over his shoulder and punching them and whacking them with a crowbar left and right. He's the first to pick up a gun and start shooting. He is a good ringleader. He's and he's also very resourceful. Like he comes up with an idea in order to start barricading up doors. He picks up a table, takes off its legs, and nails it to a door or a window. But he also starts taking doors off their hinges all throughout the house to use them as barricades as well. He's also very compassionate too. When he first shows up, he protects Barbara from zombies. But when they've fought off the dead for a moment, he walks into the house and he consoles Barbara and like gives her a hug and brings her down to earth, because at this point Barbara is like in shock and in a vegetative state. So he puts her coat around her and gives her a hug and just kind of snaps her out of it. And he gently kind of coaxes her into saying, "Hey, like, I know you're afraid. I'm afraid too." It's like the original Ben, but even better. "I know you're afraid, but you need to fight this. I can see that you're fighting, and you need to you take that energy and just use it to fuel yourself. It'll keep you strong and it'll keep you thinking straight." And Ben and Barbara's chemistry is so strong. These two are just like peas in a pod. With Ben's help, Barbara does evolve into a stronger character. But still, Barbara is fantastic, and Ben is phenomenal. you could not have had a better set of two leads for a zombie movie than Ben and Barbara in this movie. They are just pitch perfect. I have an obvious flaw with Ben, but bear with me until I get to the end of this review. Yeah, Tony Todd does a phenomenal job. Candyman, in many ways, is a better, Tony Todd does a better job. But I think I do prefer Ben to Candyman. Partially because we see more of Tony Todd, because you can never get enough of Tony Todd. But just in general, I like Ben way more as a character than I do Candyman. Tony Todd is just fucking awesome as Ben. And you can really tell, one more thing about Ben, that Tony Todd is just throwing everything he's got into this performance. Because one thing about Ben in this movie, it's a little bit implied in the original Night of the Living Dead, but you can tell that Ben's trying to survive and he's trying to ring people together and lead them to safety, but you can still tell that he's struggling with killing zombies, like mentally. Like he doesn't want to kill these people, but he has to in order to survive. Like there's a couple scenes where Tony Todd is actually has like tears down his face because he's agonizing about actually killing people. Even though they're not people anymore, it's still not a fun thing to do. So you can tell Tony Todd is just pouring everything he has into this role, and he does an A+ 100,000% good job. Pro number 5 is the Harry and Cooper conflict. Again, very similar. It's pretty much the same thing from the original. Harry wants to stay downstairs and boss everybody around and be controlling. And Ben wants to stay upstairs and have more resources and more options in case the dead do break in. And he's still saying, the cellar's a death trap. I don't want to go down there. You can be boss down there. I'm boss up here. Take it or leave it. It's a lot more hostile. There's a lot more swear words, which is nice. Not to say that much about the rest of the cast. Tom is fine. He's likable. He's a little one note. Like he just is almost like Ben's lackey. Judy, I have a problem with Judy Rose, but she's okay. Mrs. Cooper is pretty much the same as she was in the original. But special mention goes to Harry, mostly because he's played by Tom Tools, who would become way more famous, or I think he was more famous for playing Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. I've never seen that movie, though I have heard a lot about it. And Tom Tools does a phenomenal job in portraying that Mr. Cooper, to quote Andy, the maniacal cinephile, is a weasel, straight up. Here, it's a little more over the top. Like, you can kind of see that there's moments when Harry was actually willing to cooperate with Ben in the original movie. Like, he tosses Molotov cocktails from the second floor in the original movie. He helps barricade doors and windows when the truck plan goes tits up. So there's a couple moments when he does work with Harry. But here, Tom Tools just hams it the fuck up as a completely unlikable, snarky, bossy, selfish asshole. Whenever he's on screen, you just want to slug him in the face. He's whiny, he's bitchy, he's abrasive, he's unlikable, he's kind of annoying, but it's intentional. And he hams it the fuck up. Every which way, left and right, he is just not a team player. All he cares about is himself. He barely cares about his daughter. He barely cares about his wife. All he wants to do is control everything, boss everybody around, and be an obstacle for everybody's plans to survive. He is a complete, total douchebag, and he gets it good in the end. Um, just shot right between the eyes by Barbara at the end of the movie. Another one for the fire. So the Ben and Cooper conflict, again, pretty much the same, but here it's a little more over the top, and it is a little funnier. And I actually do think Tom Tools does better in his own way as Harry than the original version of Harry. Carl Hardman, I think his name was. Yeah. Yeah, Tom Tools does a great job. Pro number 6 is the music. Thankfully, all of the, even though it's good for the most part, stock music of the original movie is discarded. The music for this movie was done by Paul McCullough. I believe this is the only movie that he ever scored. He might have been like a TV guy. But Paul McCullough's music for this movie is really good. It's a lot creepy. It's kind of hard to describe. It's like it's like a 90s version of synth. But there's also a lot of deep, ominous, menacing, creepy, almost like choir voices that are used a lot throughout this movie, and it's really spooky. It actually adds into pro number 7 with this movie is the creep factor. Hold on, one thing. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, pro number 7. Yeah, the creep factor. The music it's probably the biggest thing that adds itself to this movie's creep factor, because this was established in the original, much less in my opinion though, but here you can really tell that this house is in the middle of bumfuck Egypt. It's in the, actually Bill Moseley says at the beginning of the movie, it's 200 miles from the nearest glass of beer. um Even though they say that there's towns and cities, there's the closest city to the house is 5 miles away. That's still quite a little ways away. They do establish very well that this house is in the middle of nowhere, and they're just constantly surrounded by zombies left and right, and it's just not a safe place to be. And the music really, really is very spooky. It's very low. There's nothing like super over the top and super loud and bombastic. Throughout the movie, it's this low, creepy, like quiet, synthy, just spooky music, and it really lends itself to this movie's atmosphere and creepiness. Like if you watch this movie at night, it'll definitely like kind of send shivers up your spine and like have you looking over your shoulder, feeling like you're being watched and surrounded, which is really, really good. Pro number 8 is the action scenes. There's a fair bit, but they're not super, again, they're not super over the top. Though you do have Ben going around literally beating the shit out of zombies left and right with his fists and feet and a frying pan and a crowbar. But they're a lot of fun. They slowly come more and more as the movie goes on, especially as the stakes just keep getting higher and higher. Also, like the original movie, like the whole movie is tense. There's this fear throughout the entire movie of what's outside, being surrounded in the middle of nowhere, fearing there's a zombie everywhere around any corner, tree, or bush. It's really tense and it's really nail biting. But But yeah, the action scenes get bigger and bigger. Again, that's super over the top. There's a couple shootouts. There's one big explosion, and there's some good zombie action of people going around killing zombies. Nothing, again, too over the top, but it's exciting, and it's like it kind of like wets your mouth and like satisfies your zombie uh itches pretty well, in my opinion. Yeah, lots of fun. Very well edited and very well directed as well, too, in my opinion. Goes to show Tom Savini is a pretty good director, in my opinion. Um, Not much to say, obviously, but yeah, the action scenes are still pretty good. Um, Pro number 9 is the special effects in this movie are pretty damn solid. This movie had a $4.2 million budget, and while it didn't make a lot of money, it made only 5.8 million. Sadly, I think that's just because the zombie genre was almost dead itself during the 90s. And kind of no, yeah, mostly the 90s. The special effects team, which was done by, I don't think Savini. Well, I'm sure Savini himself not intentionally. Savini himself had a hand in working on the effects, but I don't think it was him specifically that worked on the effects, like his company. I think it was somebody else, but he was hands on with the effects. Um, The effects team intentionally kept the effects restrained as they felt that excessive gore would be disrespectful to the original film. And to keep the effects realistic, they used as inspiration a real autopsy, forensic pathology textbooks, and Nazi death camp footage. Savini, he wanted to keep the film artistic despite his reputation as the king of splatter. The effects are pretty minimal, but they're just gnarly enough to showcase these as being pretty nasty zombies. There's again very minimal, but there's still some pretty gruesome looking zombies walking around. There's one that has its nose missing. And that same zombie, he's hit by a truck, bench truck actually, and broken and twisted in half. Um, There's one zombie that it's pretty nasty. He's got blue veins and a needle sticking out of his arm, so you can tell, oh, he was an OD victim. The first zombie that we see is a pretty nasty looking rotten zombie that has like a caved in eye, torn up face, and he's like drooling and has really stretched, nasty, pasty skin. There's one zombie that's walking around that was a recent autopsy victim. He's got like the stitched Y that's coming apart and it's looking pussy and gross. Um, and when zombies are shot, there's some blood that sprays out. I actually have one. I'll talk about some things with the effects pretty soon. But overall, for a movie that's directed by an effects legend, the effects are good. Not great in my opinion, but they're good enough to pull off a good zombie movie. And the scene when the zombies are eating Barbara or Judy and Tom's charred corpses is still gross. It's not nearly as long as the original movie, but it's pretty damn solid nonetheless. And the final pro that I have for this movie is the ending. I have a minor problem with the ending, but I do prefer this one overall. It is still pretty similar, but Barbara does survive. And because you do get attached to Barbara as the movie goes on, and you're so impressed with Barbara's performance as a survivor, you get attached to her. And by the end of the movie, she's still alive. And that, at least for me, that makes me happy because I really wanted her to survive. So good on them for making that change, at least. Again, Barbara's the biggest change between this movie and the original. The ending as well, but it includes Barbara. Yeah, I love this movie's ending. It is similarly bleak to the original film. It's lessened by the fact that Barbara survives, but it's of a similar, oh, is the world fucked? Um, ending that the original had. Very George Romero-esque. With all these great things to say about this film, sadly, I actually do have some problems. I have 3 nitpicks and I have 4 cons. With the nitpicks, the least of which, Judy screams way too much in this movie. If you thought Newt screaming in Aliens got just a little excessive at times, Judy takes that and takes it up to Mach 5. Most of her dialogue, honestly, in this movie is just her screaming and whimpering. Actually, I was watching this movie with my nephew and Meadow and my father-in-law back here, and with Judy screaming, I was getting a little annoyed, and they were just like, "Oh my God, can you shut the fuck up?" A lot of her dialogue in this movie is just her screaming this high-pitched ass wail, and it gets pretty damn old. Um, I can mostly push past it, but yeah, that Judy's pretty damn annoying in this movie. So just be warned, if you're gonna watch this movie, Judy's gonna get annoying pretty quick. Nitpick number 2 is the restrained gore. This has to do with one of my cons, but I just will say, while I appreciate that Tom Savini was trying to pay his respects to the original and not be disrespectful at all and, do his own thing, I still think that you could have added just a little bit more gore to this movie. I'll elaborate on that just a little later, but um, I just for now will say there's a noticeable lack of gore in this movie, especially for a zombie film. Not even just because Tom Savini is involved. For a zombie movie, especially a more modern zombie movie, there's not a lot of gore. And the last nitpick that I have, usually this would be a con, it almost is. Sadly, there was some studio meddling. Um, let's see. The production was not easy for Savini, who described it as the worst nightmare of my life. Savini said that only 40% of his ideas made it into the final film, and without Romero on set, he clashed with the producers who did not allow him to explore his vision for the film. I may as well just jump into my first con. This movie is con number 1. This movie is very tame. This has got to be the tamest R-rated modern zombie movie that I've ever seen. And this has to do also, con number 2, with the censored special effects. To avoid an NC-17 rating, Savini had to cut several scenes from the film, and Savini attributed the... Wait, what? I don't know about that. On this DVD, it's probably on the Blu-ray too. On this version of the DVD, there's like a 25-minute documentary about the making of the film, and there's a good section of it that shows a lot of the original work print footage of some of the effects that had to get cut. 2 of them in particular. The first zombie that Barbara kills, it's a big fat zombie that falls from the second floor. She kills him with a fire poker. And in the original cut, there was a scene where Barbara's extracting the fire poker from the zombie's head, and there's like peeling flesh and blood spurting all over the place. And when she gets it out, it's like slathered in blood and it like leaks all over the zombie's face. It's a pretty gnarly effect. But the biggest cut of all that always stuck out to me, when Judy, Tom, and Ben are getting on the truck, Tom kills a zombie that's trying to attack him when he's getting into the flatbed. He kicks it away, and then he picks up his double-barreled shotgun and shoots it. In the current cut, as soon as he kicks the zombie, he shoots the zombie, and then you just see the zombie fall. But in the original cut, the zombie's head would have just exploded apart in a shower of flesh, blood, and bone. It was a great effect, but that got cut, unfortunately. Savini went on to say that he kind of not really prefers, but he thinks that it's a good example of less being more. I disagree. I think this movie is pretty damn tame. And honestly, even had the extended gore bits been added, I still would say, like, this is not NC-17 worthy. This just looks like a standard R-rated zombie movie. Really, the biggest thing that makes this movie R-rated is all the language, because they say fuck a lot in this movie. But a lot of the blood, when zombies get shot, there's just like a little of blood that sprays out of their heads. And the zombies, they look rotten and dead and desiccated, but there's not much blood. There's one zombie that smears his face on a window, and there's just like a tiny amount of like rotten bodily residue that's smeared onto the window. And there's another zombie that gets stabbed in the head with a crowbar. You'd think there'd be blood all over the place, but it's very bloodless. That's why I don't really much care for the restrained gore. This is, like I said, the most tame R-rated zombie movie that I've ever seen. And especially with a special effects legend like Tom Savini being involved, it's just kind of disappointing that this movie is so tame. That the studio meddling doesn't really help, unfortunately, which is also frustrating. But again, normally it's not nearly as bad, especially since Australian film distributor Umbrella Entertainment released a special edition of the film featuring a restored print on Blu-ray April 6th, 2016. I don't know if that's still available, but if you want to search that out and check this movie out, you certainly can. But I don't know if it's still available. So, but if it is, I want to get my hands on that. So unfortunately, yeah, the special effects are a little censored. This movie is a little too tame, and the gore, I think, is a little too restrained. And the censored effects, and with it being tame, that kind of screams studio interference. Not a huge problem necessarily, but it kind of verges on it. My last two cons, one, this is the least of which, I think this film's too short. The original Night of the Living Dead is 1 hour and 37 minutes. This movie is an hour and 28 minutes. Some can see that as a good thing. It's like a streamlined version of the original movie. But I think it's still just a bit too short. I would have preferred had this movie been stretched to the 1 hour and 40-minute mark. Like add a few more scenes of zombie carnage. Add just a few more elements to make this movie even more of its own thing. As it currently stands, it's enough of its own thing, but still, had this movie been a little bit longer, I do think it would have been a little bit better. And my last con, you probably could have seen this one coming. I don't like that Ben dies. Because I love this version of Ben, Tony Todd does such a great job playing him, and his chemistry with Barbara is so good and so strong. You'd think these two would just be like two peas in a pod in a zombie apocalypse watching each other's back. But he dies. I get that it probably was done as a big homage to the ending to the original movie. That would have been another element that would have made this movie even more so stand on its own, having Ben survive. Um, but still, as it currently stands, having Ben die and come back as a zombie still feels a little bit like a spit in the face. Not nearly as much as the original movie, but among a similar vein, sadly. And that really sucks because I do like this movie a lot, but it's that ending, man. Really. I could have let the rest of the movie go had Ben survived, but because he doesn't, it just sucks, man. So, with all that being said, that's really all I have to say about 1990s remake of Night of the Living Dead. Final thoughts. I love this movie. Not quite one of my favorite overall movies, but this is still one of my favorite zombie films of all time. And this is easily one of my favorite remakes as well. This is a very solid, very well made movie made by people who are big zombie fans and especially big George Romero fans. If you have not seen this movie, I highly recommend you go out and check it out. It's a very, very solid film. I wanted to give it a perfect 10, but sadly, I cannot in good conscience. But I can give this film a very solid 8 out of 10. Great movie, great remake. Tom Savini tried his best, and I think he did a pretty damn good job. So, with all that being said, look forward to next week. I think we're going to be going to a one video a week schedule from now on, especially since I will no longer be working 4 10-hour shifts. Sad. But yeah, look forward to next week to episode 2 of Zombiesploitation with the 2005 Doom movie starring The Rock and Carl Urban. Look forward to that. And as always, remember, they're coming to get you, Barbara. So why don't you get yourself a nice big boomstick? And I will see you guys in the next video.